Mark Skaar with Joe Satriani here to talk about, among other things, a new record that's coming out, What Happens Next. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to talk to you.
Thank you. Let's start there. Where did the title What Happens Next come from?
That's the kind of a question that I ask myself all the time. As I'm running, let's say, towards the end of a tour, I've been out for 2 years, and sitting on the tour bus and driving around Europe or something like that, and I ask myself, Joe, what happens next? What are you going to do? It became like an inside joke in my brain, and but once I got a handle on the things that I was really excited about, things that I felt would be either fresh and brand new territory or going back to things I had done, let's say, decades earlier. I really was enthused to reach out to some different people and try something that would be, entirely based on sort of having both feet on the ground and writing about the human experience and basically putting science fiction aside for a while. And I reached out to Chad Smith to play the drums and Glenn Hughes on bass, and I thought this will be great, just the three of us playing some really straight-ahead rock and roll in the studio. And then, as I was working on the project, I realized, well, the title has to be What Happens Next. I'll just take the question mark out, because I finally answered that question, right? This is what happens next.
Yes, indeed. And so you kind of connected the dots, as you mentioned, Joe, because you're working with Chad Smith, who, of course, you work with in Chickenfoot. Chad has worked with Glenn on solo recordings and so forth, and you probably knew Glenn, I'm assuming, as well. But you had to ask him to be a part of this.
Yes, yeah. I didn't think that Chad would do it. I really didn't, but I've learned that lesson. If you don't ask, you'll never find out.
The answer is no. Mm-hmm.
You never get things. Yeah. So I just thought to myself, that last Chickenfoot run that we did, it was only 2 shows, but they were so eventful. They were so much fun, and I thought this is exactly what we should be celebrating in the studio is that energy and the fun that we have when we get together. But I was slightly perplexed, like who is going to be the third guy? Who's going to occupy the bass guitar space? And I was thinking about all the players that are sort of unsung bass players that are known for being outrageous in other areas. And I'd always been a big fan of Glenn's. We never really worked together outside of, I think, we played Smoke on the Water a few years earlier in London at a Marshall anniversary show. But I always just thought he was like one of those unique people who's 100% musical. Like he just can't help but sing and play and perform. He's just one of those people, And when you meet him, you see that right away. You experience his uniqueness, And then all at once I said, well, of course, as you mentioned, Glenn and Chad have worked together before. This would be great, So there's some brotherhood there, and there's history there. And he plays bass. He just drives me crazy the way he plays. I love it. So that was my plan. So I sent out a text, hey, guys, what do you think about this? And I got lucky. They both said, yes, let's do it. So the funny thing was we had to record so quickly. I got off tour from Asia, and in 3 weeks we were in the studio because of the busy schedule that Glenn had with the Black Country Communion and solo touring, and, of course, Chad with the Chili Peppers. We basically had to get into a studio in L.A., and I had the guys for 10 days. And that's why the record got finished so soon, but we had to wait until January for the release date. So that part's been it's kind of agonizing, waiting.
We're talking with Joe Satriani about what happens next. And yeah, Joe, I should say Glenn is known, of course, as the voice of rock, and a lot of people probably think about vocals, but of course he did both in Deep Purple and has really done both ever since, except the Black Sabbath time when it was just vocals. So now a new challenge of, hey, I'm just playing bass on this. This will be a cool new thing for me to do.
You're right about that, Mark. This is the first record where he never sang. He mentioned that to me, and I hadn't thought about that. But one day towards the end of the the run in L.A. We're at Sunset Sound, and he goes, Joe, I've never just played bass on a record before. And it struck him as an odd thing, like he didn't know exactly how to finish it up, But I'll tell you what I did, which was funny. When we'd be sitting around listening to takes and stuff, he'd be just naturally singing over the guitar melody or in between and things like that. And everything he sang was great. It was really one of those things where I kept thinking, wow, maybe this should be a vocal album. I just hand it over to him and let him finish it, But I started to jot down all these little melodies that he would sing, little filler things, answering the guitar riffs or the melodies. And then when we started to go over the bass performances just to clean up anything that he didn't like, I would bring out this pad and I'd say, hey, you sang this the other day right in between, my melody. Could you play that on the bass? And, of course, he would just, play it. And it sounded just like him singing, except coming out of a bass guitar. And so we recorded him playing all these little vocal scats that he came up with just sort of on the fly. And it was a way that I could capture more Glenn Hughes and get it on every song. And it was really a thrill to work with him that way.
So the record comes out January 12th. In conjunction, there's a new G3 tour with John Petrucci and Phil Collen, which that name might surprise a lot of people, but he's very virtuosic, isn't he?
He certainly is. I got together with Phil the first time this past August out here in Northern California in the Monterey Bay area for a G4 experience, which is a week-long guitar camp that we run once every year. And, man, I was just so excited to have someone with so much real-life professional experience, come to teach the students, because I can bring them one thing, but and some of the other guys that we bring along all come from different walks of the professional musical life. But Phil is quite unique because he's been in a multi-platinum stadium-playing band for decades, and the experience that he brings that he can give to the students is remarkable. What totally blew me away was a couple of things. Number one, he's a fantastic human being, very open, very positive, really made everybody feel great. He's a complete shredder virtuoso. If you give him the space to go crazy, he totally plays 10 times crazier than you ever thought he could. And then he's got that ability to really keep it together and just improvise at the drop of a hat. Like you can literally invite him up on stage and say, hey, here are the chords. You never played this song before, but this is kind of how it goes. And he just, he pulls it together in a matter of seconds, and there he is, playing it like he's rehearsed it for a couple of years. That's the mark of a true musician. So I was real happy when he decided to do that, because I didn't know if he would do that, step out of Def Leppard to do a tour like this. But I'm just so excited to see what happens when he's standing next to John Petrucci and the two of them are throwing it back and forth. It's a special thrill I get. I basically have the best seat in the house, for those kinds of moments.
And, of course, John really needs no introduction. If you love guitar, John Petrucci and you know what he's all about.
Yes, I know. Absolutely amazing. One of the things I get out of this, doing the G3s, is it's a real super lesson over and over again for me every night. And then there's a lot of things that happen during the day leading up to the show that is really cool. And there's a lot of camaraderie between all the musicians, and especially the three of us, the guitar players. And we learn from each other, and we're generally interested in even the little nerdy things like, how do you hold the pick, and what strings have you been using lately, and what's a cool pedal, stuff like that you expect from guitar players. But I think we are always generally interested in the creative part and how we manage improvising on the spot, which is really such a big part of making every show exciting for the audiences. You just have to be very lively, and you got to, be sharp and on your toes, because these other two guys are always throwing new things at you, and you have to be ready to, to catch the ball and run with it, and then throw it back. So, and John's one of those guys. He seems to have, an endless amount of technique to draw from, but he's got a great sense of humor, and he's a really great guy who can step out, and then he's a really great team player, and those are qualities that we need to make a G3 show really be eventful for the audience.
And Joe, if that weren't enough, real quick, we can talk about the new documentary that's about to come out, the Beyond the Supernova.
Yeah, wow. I'm so excited about that. You know, we're just a few days away from it debuting at the Mill Valley Film Festival here in Northern California, and we have a showing at 4 p.m. in Mill Valley, actually at the Lark Theater, which is right next door in Larkspur. And then we're playing this small little club in Mill Valley called Sweetwater. So the band from the tour, we're getting together for one last show, which is Marco Miniman on drums, Brian Beller on bass, and Mike Keneally playing guitar and keys. And we're just going to have sort of a one last celebratory blowout to have a good laugh at ourselves, looking at ourselves on the big screen. But, my son followed us around the last two legs of the Surfing the Shockwave tour, and he caught some just really funny moments, some exaggerated, over-the-top moments, the kind of things that only happen on tour. And more importantly, he found the story that was really happening, which was my, artistic catharsis. As I said at the beginning of the interview, the end of a tour brings about artistic crisis, that every artist needs to go through, which is, what am I going to do next, that became a very important look inside of my soul that surprised me quite a bit. And only my son could have seen it, you know what I mean? Because when you're working with family, you can't act, you can only be yourself and be truthful. So with this documentary he created really shines a truthful light on that process, the ending of one campaign and trying to create a rebirth, creatively to move into your next artistic space,
Well said. We'll leave it there. Joe, thank you so much. Continued success with what happens next and everything else happening next.
Thank you, Mark. Well said.
For Joe Satriani, I'm Mark Skaar.